We'll see. I'm wearing a white shirt, so we'll see how that makes it through. All right, so I'm going to talk about dyeing. It's not just embellishing. I'm going to kind of focus on dyeing because I did a little bit of research for this and want to suggest if you're interested in dyeing, at least with some of the things that I'm using and some of these ideas, you might want to check out the DVDs by Jimmy Clues. There's 2 of them that he does dyed projects in. I've seen him in person do one of the demos. It's a platter with a dyed rim. It's a really nice project, but I got a lot of tips from him. And there's also a book that I had just returned that I had for like 6 months. It's called Decorating with Turned Objects or something like that. Has a lot of interesting ideas around using color and ways to accent things. So I'm not an expert at this at all, but I've experimented over the past week to try to be able to share what I've learned. So I'm going to start out with supplies. So there are a couple different types of dyes that you can use on wood, and a lot of people, Jimmy Clues included, recommend using an alcohol-based dye, and I believe Chestnut brand is one that a lot of people use, and you can get that at like craft supplies. It's kind of expensive, and I didn't have any, so I didn't use that. But the really cool thing about it, and what I wanted to do like that, is that he's able to just take a lighter to whatever he's dyed, and it'll burn off all of the extra alcohol and the alcohol-based dyes, and then it's dry. Like, I'm using all water-based dyes, so I have just a whole bunch of pieces of wood because they're not going to be dry for me to sand them between things, because the water-based dyes actually dry a lot slower. If you go to your local Woodcraft or Rock Clear, there's a couple different types of dyes you can get there. One of them is called Trans Tint. This is not this one. It's a liquid based dye, and they say that you can mix it with either alcohol or water. I have used it mixed with alcohol with very, very good results. It's pretty expensive. I'll just throw that out there. I did not like paying that much for it, and I didn't want to buy a bunch of colors of it because I think it was like 20 bucks a bottle, but a bottle might last you forever because it's really concentrated and you're going to dilute it when you use it. So there's like pluses and minuses there, so if you really get into it, that might be a good thing for you. They seem to work really well. They're very vibrant colors. I went with the economical option. I went with what are called trans fast dyes. They make these in about, I think I saw about 15 maybe different colors on the website. They probably had 10 or 11 of them in the store. And I picked up a blue, this just says blue, a lemon yellow, and scarlet red. There were 2 reds. This one's a little bit bluer than, I think it's called cardinal red for the other red. Maybe cardinal red is more mature red because this one kind of looks a little pinkish, but anyway, I just picked up those 3 and then went through my fun process of making a bunch of colors. So I ended up making a purple. You can kind of see there. This is just a straight blue. This one is green, which was a challenge. Just the plain lemon yellow, and then an orange, which looks more red in the jar, but it actually turns to a pretty straightforward orange. And then here's the scarlet red. So I'm going to show you a little bit about mixing them, because what I have here, for anyone who's interested, especially in doing the President's Challenge, I have baggies with plenty of blue, yellow, and red for you to mix up jars with about the same amount. And you can do quite a bit of dyeing with this amount of dye. And you can experiment with it a little bit. So you can take one of each and go have fun. So when I started, I thought, oh, I'll do like Jimmy Clues, and I will mix up my dyes with alcohol, even though the packaging says mix this with hot water. This was a mistake. I did it, and not only, okay, so you can kind of see a little bit here. This is one side. This is with the water mixed as directed, except I didn't pay attention to the quantities because I wasn't making a gallon of this, let me tell you. No. But when I mixed with alcohol, it was a lot lighter. The green especially did very poorly. And if I looked at the green, it looks like a brownish green. It kind of came out a little bit better than that, but it was not the color green I was wanting to see. Really did not work very well for me. And so I just poured all of that out in the end. I wouldn't want to use these dyes on a project. They didn't really work very well. Also, the dye powder did not dissolve very well in alcohol, especially the yellow. It was really gritty and had a lot of residue. So don't ignore the instructions and just mix it with alcohol instead. Hot water seems to work best. So having done that, I'm going to put my gloves on and try not to make a big mess. I got a jar of hot water here, and we'll do a couple things of dye here, just to kind of show you how I did this. I'm not very scientific about this at all, and if I was trying to reproduce exactly the same color every time, I'd probably measure it with like a scale that could go down to the gram or something like that, but I don't really care. This is art, right? And also, half the time when I'm at home, I don't use gloves. You should probably use gloves. It's probably a good idea to use a mask. Dye powder is typically an allergen and toxic, so probably shouldn't just do this, but you know. All right, so I think I'll mix up a little bit of the blue. So the way I did this was I just kind of decided if I had enough. It's not even, this is a fourth of a teaspoon. I maybe have an eighth of a teaspoon in here. Don't take your wife's measuring spoons and do this. Get some from the yard sale down the street. I don't know. You might have a set of shop spoons, whatever. This one will be sacrificed to dye forever because you don't want to use this on food after you've used it on dye. So that's pretty much all I did. And then because it seemed to like make sense to really get it mixed up good, I just put the lid on and shook it up really nice. And there you have a pretty strong blue dye, and actually quite a bit of it compared to what I have over here because I've been using that. Simple as that. Now, this is where you get to have the fun, like, kindergarten, first grade finger painting experience, because you can mix them together and make any color you can manage to make. Now, I was pretty just solidly in the primary color, secondary color range, but if you wanted to do like a very slight orange as opposed to a really vibrant orange, you could have more yellow and less red. And in fact, let's do an orange here and see what we come up with. Green is not, I've tried several greens because green's my favorite color. I didn't get a lot of luck with those. Oh, never mind. You don't want to contaminate your dye, so I just wipe off my spoon before I use it on something else because I don't want to get blue dye into the yellow container. So we're going to start with the, I think what works better typically is to start with the lighter of the two colors if you're mixing two together. So I typically, if I'm going to do a green or an orange, I'm going to start with the yellow. So we'll get a little bit of yellow in here. That dissolved pretty well. And then let's do some red and get a nice looking orange. We're just going to do a tiny bit of red. And what I saw Jimmy Clues doing in one of his videos was instead of mixing the powder directly in, he would take a straw and like put out drops of the red that he's already mixed up and drop those in there. I think you could probably do either one you wanted. You might have a little, if you're just trying to get a very, very tiny amount, you might want to go with the already mixed. So for here, I've got my red, and I'm just going to do a very small hint of the red. It's, I don't know if you can see it. It's just a very, very tiny amount, probably less than a gram. And actually that maybe even skewed pretty darn red there, but we'll have to see what it looks like. This is, you know, you experiment. And I'm not using very much of the dye at all. Each of the packets have about a fourth of a teaspoon in them, and you could make a lot of colors with that. So there we go. That is pretty orange. And what I've been using for most of it is just scraps of an old t-shirt to dye with, and then I have some paintbrushes I'll use for other things. I also have used a lot of paper towels, but then I decided that I was using a lot of paper towels. So here, yeah, actually it turns out this is a lighter orange than the one I made before, so kind of a little bit less of that. And all I'm doing is just kind of, you know, rubbing it on. see what you get. Now, one of the really cool things about the dyes is that they are very translucent, so you can both build up lots of coats of a single color to make it more vibrant. And I have an example of that because I put, I think, maybe 3 coats of blue on here to make this a really dark blue because I want a really dark blue. But what becomes a lot more interesting, and this is where you'll see somebody like Jimmy Clues doing, is you can actually then layer different colors on top of each other and get different effects. You probably don't want to do that with the whole rainbow because you're just going to end up with brown by trying to mix everything. But if you stick in one section of the color wheel, then you can kind of have some neat effects. An example of that one is here, and actually here, I'll just send this one around. I don't know. Are you going to be my assistant for sending things? So that one just shows you can build up a single color. This one is a little bit different, and this is where I started with orange, then I sanded it very lightly and put red on top of it. So you can get a little hint of both the orange and of the red. Well, you get mostly red, but a hint of the orange underneath it. And this is actually a technique that Jimmy Clues used a lot of in his videos, and it's something that is what I was trying to All right, so let's see. One interesting thing I was playing around with was doing some stripes, and I did these with the grain, so there's kind of a grain pattern on my plywood here. And then it made me think about the fact that you could do sort of a Jupiter kind of effect on something round, and being Jupiter, yeah, that's the one that looks stripy. And the kind of cool thing here is like, if you start with the lighter colors, like here with the, actually start with the darker colors, then you can layer the lighter colors on top of them, and the water of the dye will let them kind of mix together just a little bit as you're working with them. All right. So, some guy spraying stuff. Already? Oh, I haven't been bitten yet, so now I'm sure I will. So it's kind of interesting to play around with how the colors interact, and I don't know, the stripes were not really my thing when I did it, but it was fun to play with. I did, however, like two rather similar colors, how you can just sort of overlap them and blend them together, and I didn't do this with a brush or anything, it was just with my rag as we kind of did that. And I only did one layer at this, so it's pretty pastel, but you could add on more. I don't know how concentrated these dyes can actually get, because I didn't like do the math on what they said to put in a gallon of water. I imagine some of them probably could get more concentrated, but I didn't want to use a ton of dye, so I just felt like you could just layer it up and it'll work just fine. The other thing you want to think about is these are water, so they're going to raise the grain on anything that you have turned. And if you sanded, like I did on this one, I sanded to 320 on that. Before I put any dye on it, I would want to raise the grain initially instead of having the dye do that. So that's going to open up the pores and get it ready to accept the dye. So you can do that just by misting with water or just a rag with plain water. I've got a jar of water here, and raise the grain, and it'll feel just a very slight fuzz on your fingers. Let it dry. I don't know if I let it dry before, but get that ready to go, and then you can lay the dye on top of that. I did that already with the plywood, so it's already had a little bit of water on it before. So color-wise, color theory sort of side of things, you probably want to stick with one area of your color wheel. So here I've got sort of my red, orange, yellows. That could be one trio you might want to use. You could switch that up and maybe do orange, red, purple, which is kind of what I was going for here. I didn't do red in that, but it was kind of my thoughts there. Or sort of any three next to each other should work pretty well together, and so that's what I felt like we might kind of play with here. And we're going to start with this one. So I've already done a red on this one, and what I'm going to do, and this would work way better if this actually had some kind of grain pattern and wasn't just a birch plywood. But I'm actually going to sand it down a little bit, and this is going to take off some of that red and leave me some lighter colored places that I can then layer in other colors on top of it. So I've got a few spots now. I'm kind of, I guess, making up my own grain pattern here because I'm using an uneven pressure with my fingers. But you can kind of see it's a little bit lighter there. And then that's going to let me layer in some orange right on top of that. It's going to turn fairly similar to one you guys saw go past, except it's not, because that orange is really vibrant there. It turns pretty orange, which is pretty fun. And now you're going to see that just kind of lets you layer it on top. Now, I coated the whole thing, but you don't have to. You can dab at it and do a little bit if you want to get really artistic. You could also do crazy things like I enjoy using paintbrushes. Which is something I did for some pretty neat effects on this one. I'll send this around. This has it had a layer of plain green on it, and then I used the same plain green to make what looks like grass on it, and then I put more green on top of it just to kind of tone it down a little bit so it wasn't quite so stripy. I thought it turned out pretty good. Maybe not so great at bringing out the grain pattern there, but at least it was kind of fun to do. And you could do that here with, so I've got this orange one. If I want to do like a tone on tone, I can just come in here with my orange and my paintbrush and just, sort of start making some lines of, grassy sort of lines or flowery sort of lines if I want to. It doesn't have to be super precise, but you're just layering on more color. So it just makes it slightly darker. And if you don't like it, like say I just decided I didn't like that, well, we're just gonna dip a little more dye in, and now it's just a solid dye orange. So it's pretty forgiving stuff. It's kind of fun to play with.
And Carrie?
Yeah?
In the blue bowl, did you try to put striking in it? I mean, I've seen them go.
Yes, I did. So that has several colors. It started with just a solid blue, and then I sanded it down to kind of open up some more space for me to put color in. And then I put sort of big stripes of purple with just a rag, kind of going from the center out with purple. And then I used a paintbrush to put in the stripes of yellow. So for this one, I'm not going to sand it down because it's just yellow. It'll take anything I want, but I can come through here and just do sort of like I did there. Just maybe not the full thing, maybe only down towards one side of it, and then kind of feather it out towards the top. And then if I decide that no, that's a little too harsh, I can just use a little bit of water and start to blend that between those two colors. And because it's water-based, you can just use water to help sort of smush things around. Watercolor artists do that all the time. So there's just kind of ways to soften those lines if you like it just to be a little bit less defined. Just a little bit of water will do it. Yeah, looks pretty nice. I would probably layer more colors on this one though. This is a fun one. So if I was trying to do this maybe with a darker towards the bottom and lighter towards the top, maybe next I go to red. Take some dye if you want some dye. You don't have to sneak out. If you want some dye, I didn't put these all in baggies for no reason. And then, just kind of smush some red on there. And this could be like a really good fire or fall kind of look. Again, not very exact, not very crazy, but kind of a little bit of fun. And I feel like it's all like playing with color like you might in school. So I think, that's like mostly what I wanted to show, except I did want to talk about how we might do this on a bowl. So I'm going to take a look at my bowl here. We didn't set up the lathe, which is fine, because I wasn't really going to turn anything. This bowl, I probably would want to keep really light colors when I'm dyeing, because it has spalting, and I like spalting. You could, if you're like really creative, maybe make this into some kind of scene where the spalting becomes part of the scene. Like you could do like an ocean sort of sunset look or something like that, or the hints of it. You're not going to get something that looks like a picture, but you could do those types of colors with some blues, some greens maybe, and some yellows and oranges. I'm not really that talented with it. I would probably want to stick to lighter colors like this sort of edge of it, and maybe think about starting in the center with something that's lighter and maybe having a little bit of a darker rim here for special effects, and maybe going from yellows through reds and or through oranges and out to reds, but kind of layering them on top of each other like I did here to kind of get a little bit of everything. And if I don't like it, I'll sand it off and do it again. So it's, that sort of thing.
How deep does that dye have?
That's a great question. I would say deep enough that you would probably have to turn in order to get it completely clean, because or use a pretty heavy sandpaper, because I sanded quite a bit on the blue because I felt like I really wanted to see some white wood before I put purple on it. And it took me quite a bit of sanding with a 320. I was just using 320 because I didn't want to go backwards in my grits. So I think it could take a while, unless you were cutting. If you're cutting, you'll take it away in the first pass. It's not super deep. The only thing I would be careful about is if you are on a thin turned bowl, it might go straight through to the other side. This one won't, I'm sure. It's got plenty of space. The other one had a bit of a thin rim, but the rest was fine. So, things to play with, and if anyone wants to, before we go, just come up and like poke around with the dyes and all my, squares of plywood, feel free.
Yeah. If I want a lighter blue, is it just a matter of putting water?
Yeah, right. So you can do that. So if you want just a straight lighter blue, more water, less dye, we'll do that. It's fairly light to start with, but if you really wanted like a baby blue, you could do that. And I would say you can, if you were doing really, really light colors, there's kind of a benefit to that because you can just layer them up if you want to make the parts of it a little darker. But most of these turned out fairly light. The trans tint ones are more vibrant, I will say. I have used them. They are definitely brighter than this, but they're also, like, you have to buy the exact color you want, or it looks like you do. And they were more expensive. So these are pretty fun for not very much money.
The shelf life after you mix that up is not.
It didn't indicate a shelf life. I think that it'll last until it dries out. In the Jimmy Clues video, he talks about that with the alcohol ones that he mixes from powder, and said that, you know, if your alcohol dries up, you just add more alcohol, and it'll re-liquefy. I think it's mostly pigment, so I think it'll be all right. But yeah, any other questions? And I don't think I got dye on me, so yay. And come up and get your dye, please. I think I have enough for everyone. Yeah.
You use after it's dry, maybe like put